Subscribe before the truth disappears. The mountain keeps secrets longer than we do. The wind on the northern shoulder of Mount of the Holy Cross didn't blow, it shoved. It drove needles of ice into eyes and stripped the words out of mouths before they could become warnings. At 12:41 p.m., a voice crackled through a cheap two-way radio, thin, panicked, the syllables bitten off by static. I'm slowing down. I'll catch up. It was the voice of a woman in a blue shell jacket, hood cinched tight, cheeks red from sun and altitude. Her name was Michelle, a mother of 4 who had promised nothing more than a Saturday summit and a late dinner. She stood just below the last steep pitch, watching her party trace the ridge like dark commas against the white. 20 minutes earlier, she'd said she needed a moment. 15 minutes later, the ridge bent in fog, and she fell out of sight. Any mountain rescuer will tell you that most disappearances are not cinematic. People don't vanish in the middle of a scream or a dramatic flail of arms. They make a small decision that becomes a larger one. A detour around a wind slab, a line of steps that look easier, a couloir that promises shelter from the gusts. And then the weather changes, and the mountain changes with it. The first frantic calls hit the Eagle County Dispatch at 3:06 p.m. Hikers on the ridge could not find their friend. They'd shouted until their throats scraped raw. They'd combed back to a stand of crumholts where the trail faded, checked beneath ledges, probed cornices with their trekking poles. Nothing. No glove, no bright scrap of nylon. The mountain had shut its throat and swallowed the afternoon. By 4 p.m., a sheriff's truck bounced up the rough road to Half Moon. Volunteer search and rescue, men and women who kept ropes and thermal blankets in their trunks like other people kept strollers and golf clubs, began kidding up in the gravel. Their leader, a former smoke jumper named Tom Keene, unrolled a topo map across his tailgate and pinned it with radios. "Last known point here," he said, planting a finger just off the ridge where the exposure steepened to the east. "Winds cutting north, gusting hard. If she bailed to shelter, she'd have aimed for the leeward, here, or—" He trailed off, eyes sliding to a shaded tongue of blue on the map. A couloir, gouged deep from the shoulder into the basin below, narrow as a throat, clean as a blade. "Or she got funneled," someone said. "Or she got funneled," Tom repeated, as if saying it out loud would make the mountain give her back. They worked the problem the way professionals do when the problem might already be a memory. They triangulated the radio pings and met nothing but static. They ran dog teams along the timberline where smell holds. They dragged the couloir with avalanche beacons set to search and heard only the dull, steady click of cold electronics. By midnight, the star field above was knife bright, and the temperature had fallen enough to chew battery life out of headlamps. They pulled back because living rescuers are not allowed to become dead ones. 3 days widened into 3 weeks and then into a season. Helicopters flew tight grids until they were bled of fuel and daylight. Snow fell early and honest. 100 orange-vested volunteers in formations like combs skated scree and crawled alder. They found boot prints where she'd been, but none where she went. They found a single water bottle, partly crushed in a runnel where snowmelt braided down. They found a ribbon of blue jacket lint caught on a splintered branch. They did not find Michelle. Families learn language for grief they never asked to speak. Searchers tell them truths meant to comfort and truths meant to brace. In a community center in Minturn, Tom drew lines on a map and explained how wind scour and deposition zones load, and why sometimes the safest place to wait for help is the worst place to fall. The room filled with the kind of silence that only happens when people are doing math with their hearts. After the 3rd week, the official search scaled back. After the 4th, it ended. The mountain kept its secret for 19 years. In the spring of 2024, the snow gave late. It peeled off the couloirs in thick tongues, revealing the winter's horde a yard at a time. A team of volunteers, gray at the temples now, knees that popped on cold mornings, hands still sure with rope, returned to the same map and the same slope lines, because some puzzles don't stop persuading you. They were not promised anything. They went anyway. The couloir that had been an arrow on the tailgate map was a gash in the rock, steep enough that your calves burn just looking at it. A pair of climbers, the kind that move with quiet, neat competence, lowered into it on a bright morning and sank their ice tools to test the fall line. On the third rappel, the lead climber paused, weight in the harness, and said a single word in a voice you use when you don't want to break the world. Here. What they found was not a scene, not an answer that popped clean like a cork. It was the careful unspooling of 19 winters. It was a blue shell jacket, the color bleached to glacier, pinned under an apron of scree. It was a tangle of fabric that had been a pack strap, a cracked plastic whistle, a watch with a spidered face. It was a human truth reduced by time to the essentials, gathered by gloved hands and a chain of custody that felt like ceremony. The coroner's office used the phrase, consistent with a fall. The mountain used no words. News traveled the way news does now, quickly and bluntly. Headlines paired the same before and after images, smiling family photos from 2005 beside a rescue rig parked at a trailhead in 2024. The county issued a statement that said what statements say: closure for the family, gratitude to the volunteers, and an acknowledgement that nature keeps what it keeps. Cameras found Tom standing by the same truck, older now, map folded in his back pocket. He told a reporter from Denver, who looked barely old enough to shave, people want a villain. Sometimes it's just terrain. She could have been one step off the ridge, and one step can be 40 feet in a couloir like that. If you want to blame something, blame angle and ice. But not everyone wanted to leave the story there. That's when Detective Aaron Hale's phone lit up. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, and then a text that felt like a dare. If you want the real story, it's at the basin below Cross Creek. The mountain didn't keep everything. Aaron had inherited a handful of almost cases since transferring from Metro to the sheriff's office, a portfolio of grief she carried like extra weight in a vest. She read the text twice, then a third time. The sender had attached a photo, a crumpled map page, edges feathered from 1,000 pocket folds, with a narrow pencil line from the ridge slanting into the couloir. At the bottom margin, someone had written in cramped block letters, "Stay with the wind, East Ridge only." The words were underlined hard enough to dent the paper. "Cruel joke," Tom said, when she showed him the message in the parking lot at Half Moon. He squinted at the photo. Or an old note she wrote herself. Hikers scribble reminders. She could have carried this in '05. Then why send it to me now? Aaron asked. He didn't answer. He was looking at the pencil line again, the one that left the ridge as if a hand had hesitated, drifted, then committed. They hiked at first light, because dawn is the only honest time the mountain offers. Snowfields popped under their boots. In the basin below the couloir, late-lying drift glowed like old porcelain. The volunteer climbers had flagged the recovery site, a small geometry of orange tape and reverent distance. Erin stood with her hands in her pockets, letting the wind press against her coat, and asked the question all detectives ask at scenes that insist they are not crimes. What doesn't fit? The answer seemed, at first, to be nothing. The slope told its story plainly. You could see the line where a person, tired and cold, might have stepped out of the lee and into the throat of the couloir. You could see the runnel where spring melt had worked like a slow saw. You could see, if you let yourself, How easy it would have been to choose wrong. Then one of the volunteers said, "Detective," and pointed to a rock ledge at the couloir's edge. Erin climbed the short scramble and found a narrow pocket in the stone, the kind of hide a child would choose for treasures. Inside lay a small, weathered bundle wrapped in the corner of a ripstop stuff sack and tied with faded cord. She slit the cord with her pocket knife and eased the fabric back. Inside were things that did not belong to weather, intentional things. A small spiral notebook with half the pages gone, a silver locket on a thin chain, the hinge stiff but working. A disposable camera, the kind with a cloudy viewfinder and a wheel you thumb to advance the film. The camera's plastic had crazed in 100 hairline cracks, but it was intact. On the back of the notebook, someone had written a name that made Erin's scalp prickle. M. Vanek. Tom let out a long, careful breath. "She stashed this," he said, "on purpose." Erin eased open the notebook. Most pages were blank, humid soft and welded at the corners, but 5 lines of pencil on the first page had survived in a ghost of graphite. "Too tired, turned, followed snow to shelter, steep, narrow, will try to climb out when clear. Tell them I stayed on the ridge as long as I could. Wind sounded like voices." She read it aloud. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds. The air itself seemed to lean closer, as if the mountain wanted to hear the page again. Tom looked at the couloir, then back at the pocket. "Why hide it?" he asked. "You want to be found, you leave notes on top, not tucked into rock. You set things where searchers will see them." "Unless you're protecting them," Erin said, surprising herself. "From weather, or from—" She didn't finish. She was turning the camera over in her hand, thumb finding the familiar ratchet of the advance wheel. It fought, then grudgingly clicked 3 frames forward, as if the film inside still remembered how to move. "You're not going to—" Tom began. Erin shook her head. "No, chain of custody first. If there's anything on here, it'll need a specialty lab. But if it held on—" She trailed off, imagining the grain, the washed-out blues, the way snow eats contrast and gives it back as glare. And somewhere in it, a frame that might tell them which way she'd looked when she took a last photograph. They bagged the bundle with a hush that felt like church. Erin slid it into her pack and turned once more to the ridgeline. The wind had dropped, and in the brief quiet, she could hear meltwater running under snow, bright and invisible. Back in the lot, her phone buzzed again. Another blocked number, another message. "You found the notebook. Good. Don't trust the dates. The camera matters. Check the last frame." She looked up sharply. The parking area was a scatter of trucks and dusty SUVs, a handful of people sitting on tailgates, tying boots, nobody looking at her for longer than a glance. Tom read the message and swore under his breath. "Who is that?" he asked. "Someone who wants us chasing, or someone who can't let this end." The envelope from the lab arrived 4 days later, the tape on it still cold enough to hold the print of her thumb when she pressed it. Erin carried it to an interview room instead of her desk, because rooms with 1 table and 2 chairs make people tell truths, even when the people are alone. She slit the seal, slid the report out, then the proof sheets, contact prints of 36 frames coaxed out of old emulsion. Most were what you'd expect when a camera rides in a pocket on a mountain. Sky, glare, swaths of white broken by dark ribs of rock. 2 held a boot tip and the slope beyond, blur of motion and the edge of a pole basket. 1 caught the ridgeline, the line of ants that had been her group. And the last. Erin steadied the page with both hands. The last frame was a tilted slice of couloir, narrow, stone jaws, sky a thread above. In the foreground, near the left margin, a glove, my glove, reaching. and faintly in the reflected curve of a goggle lens on the edge of the frame, a shape behind her that did not belong to rock or snow. A figure, close. She felt the room tilt, papers sighing as air shifted under them. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang 3 times and then stopped. The fluorescent light hummed like old bees. Aaron lifted the contact sheet closer, breath fogging the polyethylene sleeve. If the lab could pull detail from that last square, if the grain held and the light had been kind, her phone vibrated on the table, screen lighting the pale room. "Open the locket," the message read. "Then you'll understand why she turned." The locket was smaller than she remembered, barely the size of a coin, its silver dulled by years of exposure and fingerprints that had long since faded. Detective Erin Hale sat at her kitchen table at dawn, the sky outside still the color of bruised paper. Steam curled from her mug, but she hadn't touched it. The locket rested between her fingers, its hinge stubborn, refusing to open, as if it too wanted to hold its secrets. When it finally gave, it wasn't with a click, but with a sigh. Inside was a photo. 2 faces, cropped close. Michelle Vanek, smiling into sunlight, and beside her, a man Erin didn't recognize. His arm was around Michelle's shoulder, his smile tighter, smaller, as if he wasn't used to being in photos. On the back of the tiny image, in cramped writing that had faded to near invisibility, were 3 words: "Don't tell Tom." Erin stared at it until the words blurred into the silver. The name hit her like a pulse. Tom Keene, the same man who had led the original search, the same man who had found her remains, the same man who'd been there 19 years later when they uncovered the notebook. She felt something twist low in her gut. Was it grief or something darker? By mid-morning, the sheriff's office was a hum of fluorescent light and distant ringing phones. The forensic lab tech, Maria, met Erin at the door, holding a sealed folder with latex-gloved hands. "We processed the camera film," Maria said. "It's old, but it held up better than we expected. You'll want to see this." They walked together down the hall, shoes squeaking faintly on the tile. Erin's heart thudded with the same rhythm it always did before a revelation, that strange mix of adrenaline and dread that only detectives knew. They entered the dark room, where contact sheets hung like silent flags from drying clips. Maria pulled one forward and pointed. "Here, last frame." Erin leaned in, her breath catching. There it was again, that blurred, impossible reflection, the shape behind Michelle. At first glance, it could have been shadow, a distortion from the snow glare. But on closer look, it wasn't just a figure, it was a silhouette with defined shoulders, a hood, a faint outline of a climbing pack. And where the face should have been, the light had caught a hint of skin and the edge of a mustache. Erin exhaled. "That's a man." Maria nodded, biting her lip. "We ran enhancement on the negative. It's too degraded for full ID, but we compared proportions, the angle of the shoulder, the height relative to her. Whoever it is, they were right behind her when the photo was taken." "Could it have been someone from her hiking group?" Erin asked. Maria hesitated. "Possibly, but there's more. Look, see this?" She pointed to a faint shadow in the background, a small line, half buried in snow, bending toward the edge of the frame. "That's not random debris. It's a rope, or at least it used to be." Erin's mind began to churn. A rope meant proximity, a connection. Either someone was with Michelle, or someone had been close enough to reach her. She left the lab in silence, the folder tucked under her arm. Outside, the Colorado sun was too bright, too clean. Everything felt wrong beneath that kind of light. Tom Keene was waiting in the parking lot beside his truck, the same one from 19 years ago, dented, rusted, still carrying the faded SAR emblem on the door. He waved, smiling like a man who'd already had his coffee and didn't have ghosts in his inbox. "Heard you got the camera back. Any luck?" Aaron studied him. His face was lined deeper now, eyes sunburned from decades on ridges and river valleys, but there was something else, a flicker in his gaze when she didn't immediately answer. It survived, enough to raise more questions. He grunted softly. It always does. Aaron pulled the locket from her pocket and placed it in his hand. His fingers froze on the cold metal. "Recognize her?" she asked, voice flat. Tom's thumb traced the outline of the faces before the photo even opened. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, but the silence that followed told her everything. "Where'd you find that?" he said at last. "In the same couloir where you found her remains. You didn't mention that she might have been with someone." "She wasn't," Tom replied, his tone quick and practiced. "We covered every inch of that mountain. If anyone else went down with her, we'd have found them too." Aaron watched his eyes, the subtle twitch of denial that came half a second too late. "The note in the locket says otherwise." He frowned, shaking his head. "I don't know what kind of story you're chasing, detective, but I think you're trying to make a tragedy into a conspiracy. Maybe. Or maybe you're trying to keep it from becoming one." Tom looked away then, out toward the distant mountains. His jaw worked slowly. "Sometimes, detective, not every truth is worth digging up. The mountain is cruel enough without us turning it into a courtroom." "Maybe. But someone sent me that text. Someone who knew it was there. And if this man in the photo isn't just shadow, then she wasn't alone." She waited for him to respond. He didn't. That night, Erin sat in her apartment, lights off except for the glow of her laptop. She replayed the 2015 case footage, old camcorder grain, volunteers sweeping snow, a younger Tom Keene pointing toward a ridgeline. Her cursor hovered over a timestamp, Day 4, afternoon footage. The audio was muffled, but one line cut through the wind. She said she was following him down, something about a shortcut. The voice came from an unknown searcher, off camera, answering a question. Aaron paused, rewound, listened again. A shortcut, following him down. She scrubbed the footage back, eyes narrowing. Tom was there, on screen, turning away from the camera just as those words were said. He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. The next morning, Aaron drove back toward Holy Cross. The same snow-covered road twisted through pines heavy with frost. Her cell signal dropped to nothing. She wasn't going for evidence anymore. She was going for truth. Halfway up the trail, she saw boot prints, fresh ones, leading toward the couloir. They were deep, firm, made by someone carrying weight. Tom's truck had been at the lot again, parked at an angle like always. As she climbed higher, the fog thickened, turning the world to gray. Then, through the white curtain, she saw a shape, a figure standing near the same pocket of rock where they'd found the bundle. Tom, his back to her, head bowed. She called out, "Tom!" He didn't turn. When she reached him, he was holding something, a weathered leather-bound notebook, the same kind as before. He looked over his shoulder, eyes glassy but calm. "Didn't think you'd come this soon," he said softly. "You're not going to like what's in here." He handed it to her, the pages stiff and waterlogged, but one entry clear, written in firm, deliberate script, a man's handwriting. She panicked near the ledge, tried to turn back. I told her to stay on the ridge, but she slipped. I swear I tried to hold on. Below that, in smaller writing, a different pen, maybe written later, 4 words. "Don't let them find me." Erin's pulse thudded in her ears. "You wrote this," she said quietly. Tom looked down at the snow. "I didn't push her," he said, "but I was there." The silence between them filled with the low moan of wind over ice. Aaron felt the mountain press around them, as if the whole slope had been waiting for this confession. "She wanted to turn back," he continued. "Said she couldn't breathe. I told her it was just altitude, that she was close. We argued. I went ahead a few steps to clear the path. When I turned, she was gone. And you didn't tell anyone? Aaron's voice cracked like breaking glass. He shook his head. By the time I found her, it was too late. The fall must have been instant. I couldn't carry her out. The storm was coming. I told myself I'd report it, but the days blurred. I told her family we searched, and I went back up later, tried to move her where she wouldn't be found. It wasn't meant to hide her, I just couldn't face what I'd done. The weight of it hung in the frozen air, heavy and terrible. Aaron stepped closer, eyes wet with cold and fury. You left her there for 19 years. Tom's breath came shallow, and the mountain never forgave me. From behind them, the wind shifted, carrying a sound like a distant shutter click. Aaron turned sharply, scanning the snowfield. No one. Only the whisper of air and the mountain watching in silence. That night, her phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. He's lying. Check the camera again. Frame 12, not 36. Erin opened her laptop, heart racing. She pulled up the earlier shots of ordinary snow, clouds, the ridge. But on frame 12, barely visible in the glare, was something new. A man standing above Michelle, looking down at her, one hand raised, a rope trailing from his pack. And behind him, another figure, smaller, blurred, holding something metallic in the sunlight. Not one person, two. Her breath hitched. Maybe Tom wasn't lying. Maybe he wasn't alone. And suddenly, the story wasn't about a single disappearance anymore. It was about a secret that two people had buried, and one had died trying to keep. When they finally checked the rest of the film, one thing became clear. Someone else had been on that mountain the day Michelle vanished, and their name wasn't on any report.
The film developer called just after dawn. Erin was already awake, her apartment half lit by the cold Denver sunrise that turned everything silver. She'd spent most of the night replaying frame 12 in her head, the two figures above the couloir, one looking down, the other half turned toward the lens as if aware of being watched. When the voice came through the phone, it was calm, clinical. Detective Hale, the second figure, we managed to enhance it. There's a face, a partial but distinct. Sending the file now. Her laptop pinged seconds later. The image loaded slowly, pixels bleeding into shape. A man, early 30s maybe, clean-shaven, short dark hair, wearing a windbreaker. He stood a few yards behind Michelle, and in his right hand, he wasn't holding a rope. He was holding a camera, the same disposable model that had been found in her belongings. Erin's chest went tight. There weren't supposed to be two cameras. By 10 a.m., she was back on Highway 24, climbing toward the pass, the radio crackling with the morning forecast. Clear skies, low wind, perfect for hiking. The same kind of day Michelle Vanek vanished. The sheriff's office had officially closed the case. Accidental fall, they'd ruled after the coroner's report. But Erin had seen enough accidents to know when the air didn't fit the explanation. At the trailhead, Tom Keene's truck was gone. In its place sat an old beige SUV, dusted with frost. The plates were temporary. The tires were still warm. Erin zipped a jacket, grabbed a pack, and started up the trail. The mountain loomed above her, its ridges sharp against the pale sky, the couloir a long white scar cutting down its face. Each crunch of snow underfoot felt louder than the last. Halfway up, the quiet broke. "Detective," a voice echoed from the switchback ahead. Tom stood there, breath steaming, gloves hanging from his belt. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. "You shouldn't be here," she said, keeping her tone steady. "The case is sealed. Maybe to you, not to me." He gestured toward a side path, a narrow track leading away from the main trail. "Someone's been back. Boot prints. Old, but not mine. I followed them to a ridge pocket. There's something." The something was a canvas rucksack, half buried under snow and gravel. Aaron knelt beside it, brushing frost from the faded initials stenciled on the flap. R.L. Raymond Lasky. A name that had popped up once in the 2005 reports, a Denver outdoor guide who had supposedly led a small hiking group that same weekend. He'd been questioned back then and cleared, but the group never matched Michelle's route exactly. So everyone thought. Inside the pack were what you'd expect from a hiker. Rope, a small radio, a cracked compass, and then something that didn't belong. An old cassette recorder, the kind that ran on AA batteries and hissed when you pressed play. He flipped it over. A label on the back read, "Cross Creek, September 24th. The day Michelle vanished. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid in new batteries from her pack. The machine whirred, coughed static, then came a voice, soft but clear, spoken close to the mic. "This is Ray Lasky, Cross Creek Basin, 1542 hours. We're off route. The woman's name is Michelle. She's cold, panicked. Tom says we can still beat the storm if we cut east through the chute, but she's not steady. I told him we should go back. He told me to stay quiet." The recording crackled, wind roaring through the mic, then another voice, distant, unmistakably Tom's. "Keep moving. We'll sort it out below." Then a scream, a sharp intake, a sound like rock giving way. The tape ended. Aaron sat back in the snow, pulse pounding in her ears. Tom's face had gone gray. "I didn't know he recorded that. He was supposed to destroy it." Aaron stared at him. "You told me you were alone." He nodded slowly, defeated. "I was, after it happened. Lasky and I were both there that morning. She was supposed to hike down with him while I checked the upper ridge. When the fog rolled in, they got separated. I found her halfway down the chute, bleeding from the fall. Lasky came later, yelling that we'd gone the wrong way." "You left that out of every report," Aaron said. "Because it wouldn't have mattered. They'd call it negligence, say I led him wrong. I thought the mountain would keep it." Aaron looked back toward the couloir, now lit by noon sunlight, a glittering river of ice that hid too many things for too long. "It didn't," Aaron said. "It just waited." That afternoon, Aaron drove to the small cabin listed under Raymond Lasky's name, 20 miles east, tucked behind a grove of pines. No smoke from the chimney, no tire tracks in the drive, but the mailbox flag was up. Inside was a single envelope, addressed in Lupin script. "Detective Hale, I know you're looking." She tore it open carefully. Inside was a single Polaroid, the same format as before, but this one was sharp, deliberate. It showed the couloir from above, the same angle as Michelle's final frame. In the lower corner was a handwritten note. She didn't fall. She jumped to get away from him. Below that, faintly, the initials RL. Aaron stood in the doorway of the empty cabin, the wind pushing snow across the steps. The phone in her pocket buzzed. Unknown number again. This time, a voice message. She pressed play. "Detective Hale, you've seen the tape by now. Tom's not innocent, but neither am I. We were supposed to bring her down together. I told him he was reckless, and she panicked, tried to get ahead of us. I reached for her. I swear I did. You'll find the rest where the river bends below Cross Creek. Bring the locket. Then, a cough, a gasp, and the sound of something falling. Silence. Era's blood ran cold. By dusk, she was back near the basin, headlights cutting through blowing snow. The river below Cross Creek was frozen in places, open in others. Black water threading between slabs of white. She followed the banks until she saw it, a rusted metal box half embedded in ice. It took her 10 minutes to chip it free. Inside were water-damaged papers, handwritten journal pages, folded photographs, and a map. And beneath them, a second locket. This one wasn't silver. It was brass. Inside was a photo of Michelle and Raymond standing together at a trailhead, both smiling. The same week she vanished. 2 days later, the sheriff's office released a joint statement. The official record now read, accidental death with contributory negligence, both parties deceased. Tom Keene's truck was found at the base of the trail. Inside was a note, short, written in the same steady hand as the old notebook. I couldn't tell him the truth. I tried to save her. I failed. The mountains got room for one more. He'd gone back up alone that night. Search teams found his body below the ridge where Michelle fell. Erin filed her report and drove home in silence. The box from the river sat on her passenger seat, the brass locket beside it. Every answer felt like a wound. That night, as snow began to fall again, she played the tape one last time, listening closely. This time, beneath the wind and static, she heard something she hadn't before. Faint, but distinct. A woman's voice. Michelle's. Soft, almost calm. Tell them it wasn't the mountain. Then the tape hissed. The reel stopped, and the silence felt like a grave closing. In the morning, Erin sealed the evidence and sent it to archives. But before closing the box, she slipped the original silver locket inside and whispered, maybe now it keeps no more secrets. Outside, the mountains loomed pale and endless, the wind whistling through pines like a distant whisper. She walked into the woods and never came back. Until now. The camera panned wide. The snow, the road, the peaks dissolving in the cloud. If you thought this one was over, wait until you hear what the mountain gave up next. Subscribe before the next storm hits.